So let's attempt to complete this section over here, essentially the shoulder area. So what we have is we have a cylinder that almost wraps itself around, or fits nicely around the actual center of the body. So rather than it intersecting wildly, it needs to sort of fit there with a bit of curvature on the end to try and give the illusion of a piece of metal that sits on another piece of metal. And these areas here are simply an extrusion from that base cylinder, extruded out again, and that's it really. Nothing complex about it whatsoever. But what can be a challenge can be having almost like an organic curvature on a metal object. But it's quite easy to do if you know the right tools. So what we'll do is we'll give it a go using an FFD, a simple FFD modifier, so Freeform Defamation. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make our body, so you'll already have a variation of that body no doubt at this point. I'm going to hide my bounding box, so I'll leave it on 18 size for the time being. So rather than recreate it from scratch, I'm just going to, for the shoulder area, I'm just going to duplicate this particular cylinder, just move it into location, and I'm just going to scale it to where I think my shoulder needs to be. So I'll assume that that's adequate enough. So the way it's going to work is we're going to use Freeform Defamation. So if I click on Modifier List, press FFD, I'm going to use a 3x3x3, press F1, read up on what the actual FFD modifier is and how to control it. So if I click on top mode now, we have what's known as a cage. So if I was to move that cage, so if I click on the control point over here and then just manipulate this, you can see that what it does, it tries to create organic curvature via movement of control points, which can prove very, very, very useful. So if we were to traditionally model that, then this would be a very, very, very quick way of doing it. I'm just going to undo that. We'll go into top mode, go into wireframe, and I'm just going to manipulate this so it almost sits on the curvature of the body. Our body underneath at the moment is too low poly. You can see it's going to intersect a bit wildly there. When we do our low poly variant, or the correct low poly for the body, naturally it's going to look a bit more detailed, more like this I would have thought. So you can see now that our FFD is almost flowing around that quite nicely. So it's rather than it intersecting wildly, it's flowing around it. So I am just going to the top mode, just select these. Select those 3 control points again. You will need to select them from within the modifier. And I'm just going to adjust those so they slightly sit on the outskirts. That would do. There we are. That's quite good. That would work quite well. If we were to modify this further, we could select these particular control points over here. And then we could essentially start manipulating this further and trying to create some form of bend. So you could do that, I suppose. That would work reasonably okay. The other alternative to that is if we just undo a few steps. We'll accept that for what it is at the moment. Quite happy with that. The other alternative is to put a bend modifier on top of that. I'm going to go to the side view, left in my case. And within the bend modifier, I'm just going to expand that out because we may need to move the gizmo to the center. If we were to put a bend on there and then put on there something like 90 degrees, you can see what's going to happen. It's going to bend that around on the angle that we set. But what's happening is it's slightly moving these verts over here, so they're no longer sitting on the surface of that body, which can be problematic. If we were to just continue with that, then we're going to have a slight gap, which can be cumbersome to fix. We could grab the additional or the control points again and push them back, or the alternative, I think that could be problematic really. So the alternative would be, so control this a bit better. So if we try and limit the effect, just try and get it to the point where, let's have a look, see if we can limit that. We're on the right axes. We could try moving the center as well. Just move the center across to there. Turn on limit again, and then we should be able to. Would help if I was doing it at the right angle. You can see now this is going to remain static because we've moved the center, so the bend is starting from here, and then it allows us a lot more creative freedom. So something on those lines will probably work. I'll agree with that for the time being, and quite happy with that. I'm just going to collapse 2 on top of that. You can see now it's going to flow quite nicely around that. And the reason why we want this is because ultimately when we do a turbo smooth, we're going to try and create soft chamfered edge that sits on this particular body section. So you don't have that harsh edge, and that's the neighbour's dog barking. So collapse editable, oops, not G-poly, collapse editable poly, and let's start creating the high resolution version. So we've got this. I've selected that particular poly. If you've only got the boundary of it in edge mode when you've done the selection in the poly, press F2 and it will show the selection in a different alternative way, which helps, I think. So we'll inset that. I'm going to agree with that. No, we'll make it slightly thicker. Agree with that. I'm going to click on the plus. What we want to do is we want to try and replicate that here internally. So I'm going to press F3 so we can see what's going on. And there we are along the curvature where the shoulder connects with the body. We'll just add that inset on there as well. So click on that. And with that selected, I'm just going to press delete because we don't actually need that any longer. So here, it looks like I've added an additional loop there, not a problem. Double click on that edge loop, control backspace will delete that. And then now within here, I could just extrude this, just press left, press F3, and then just manipulate this so it sits inside, and then just rotate it around. And then I can delete that. And that way we'll have an interior, which you're not going to see a great deal of, but there could be instances where you might see some of the edges over here. That's worthwhile putting an interior in if you think it's going to be seen. So yeah, that should now be the stage where we can easily add the additional loops in that we need. So the same process of adding in an edit poly, renaming it accordingly. I'm not going to do so now, and then adding in the swift loops via the chamfer or the swift loop. So rule of 3 still applies. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3. And we'll put some additional support loops in a few moments, but we need to do the same over here. It's going to zoom in. 1, 2, and 3. And that's sufficient enough, I think, at this stage. You can see that our shoulder is actually quite low poly. So when it comes to doing the bake, if you try and bake something which is arguably that smooth, you're going to struggle to get a good effect trying to replicate that level of curvature with this level of simplicity. So it's worthwhile going back to your edit poly and adding in some additional loops so it's not so low poly and fragmented. So this is where we can use swift loop again, but if you press and keep hold of shift and press it, it will average out, and you can see it's going to add the curvature. There we are. So that there would give us a much better result. So we probably could add some additional loops in there, but probably should. So let's add some additional support loops in there just to tighten off this particular area. Put a connect in there. We can always move that slightly closer like so. Press shift, or press click on one edge, press shift. It should select the others, he says. Yeah, there we are. And then just manipulate that so it's the opposite. And click on the tick. And now we're back to our high poly. And our low poly is simply a matter of moving the modifiers. So we've done a similar thing where we haven't correctly put this on the right modifier. Again, not an issue. You duplicate the mesh. This is called high poly. In your low poly, take you 5 seconds to select those edges, delete them, and that's sufficient enough. But the beauty of this is what you're doing is you're trying to recreate that chamfered look of a metal object that sits on another metal object. And that in the long run will work really well. That there is going to work better than that, where you've got that harsh intersection and you can almost see it against the low poly body. So you can see the difference there. It will help just by putting that chamfer in. So that's how to do the actual shoulder. So give that a go and show me the results when you can.